Hi, Jason. Welcome to GTM Expertise. Thanks for taking the time.
Hey Ben, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about go-to-market in the age of AI perception, which I know is something you're going to share a little bit more about. And I'm pretty excited to get into that. Before we get into that, it'd be great to get an intro from yourself, kind of where you came from, a bit of your career journey, and then what you're doing today.
Yeah, great. So my name's Jason Friedlander. I've had a crazy career journey in the tech world for sure. Came out to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter. Ended up working in some cool reality shows and stuff like that, and fell into home entertainment side of the entertainment industry. And when I fell into that, it was running some interactive creative divisions for what was Technicolor, Deluxe, big Hollywood kind of studios out here. And it was like the perfect timing. It was when the websites were becoming big, so every studio was having us build websites. We were building interactive features on Blu-ray, and then the iPhone kind of came out and we started building things there. So it introduced me to the tech side through the entertainment world. From there, I was lucky enough to meet a couple people, and we co-founded a company called Uplink that helped ABC and Disney bring their content online, their live content really, in about 2010. And then in 2013, that was acquired by Verizon. So I spent a 13-year journey in the Verizon world, in and out of being sold to VC and stuff like that. And that's where my tech focus kind of shifted from the creative side to more of the go-to-market side, the selling side. Eventually ran product marketing for the division at Verizon, and then kind of de facto CMO for the department we were in. And then for about the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of consulting with different companies in the space, fractional CMO stuff, go to market as well, all across from media to different places. And working on some of my my own stuff with some of my co-founders that I've worked on in the past. So one of the things, we have a new company that we've started called Sentiment that's helping brands understand their perception in the AI space, which is obviously on the top of everybody's mind as it comes to go to market in the next few years.
Awesome. Great intro. Yeah, definitely a fun background. That sounds like a good journey, Jason.
Yeah. If we want, we could do a whole thing of all the missions I had to test on road rules, when I was in reality. But that's a separate topic.
Sounds good. Like, break it down for us a little bit on the very basics. Sentiment is a really good starting point, I think, because we're talking about how to go about GTM. Let's say you're an early stage startup right now. You come into the market. What do I maybe have a background, and you're kind of, some people are perhaps relating it to SEO or similar or anything, and like, what does it mean now in the AI world? Break it down for us. Like, what do I need to know as a startup founder in this new AI world?
I think from a startup founder, which I am as well, like I think the idea is to try to weed out the noise. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot of companies in this space calling, GEO, AI visibility, all this kind of stuff, that are selling vibe coded skin prompts. They wrote a prompt, it gives them some result, and now all of a sudden I have a business that offers you all this stuff. And actually, as a co-founder in the space and as a marketer in general, as a go-to-market person, it really bothers me the kind of dishonesty that's coming across in some of that stuff. People are trying to sell platforms for startup founders. Oh, I have to increase my visibility. But the truth is there's not a lot of science to prove that any of that stuff actually currently works in that space. And there's real ways to measure that. And we can get into that in a little. But I think from a go-to-market perspective, I would say identify your vendors properly. And then from a go-to-market perspective, I would say focus on SEO, right? I would say do a lot of the things that you and other people have done in the past. Don't try to game the SEO system. I would say don't spend, money on backlinks and trying to game the system so you prop up, but write great content. Make sure your website answers the questions. Make sure it's structured so it's readable from a LLM when it scrapes your site. So I would say do the things that people traditionally do and keep moving that way. Our bet and my bet is that the better content you produce, the more you show up in authoritative places, whether you're doing interviews or guest blogs or interviews like this or meeting analysts, the better the LLMs will understand your brand and thus increase your visibility in the long term.
Got it. That's very helpful. The human aspect to that is also needs to take into account, right? So obviously you've got the AI perception of your brand and how an LLM reads it. You've got how a Google search will read it, but then you've also got then behind that the human probably who's going to read that. Like how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what I said. If you write great content, if you produce great stuff, if you present your brand in a real authoritative way, it's going to check the box on all of those things. I think some of the interesting stats that I found, learning this space over the last year and really diving as deep as we've gone is that, from a B2B perspective, if you're selling B2B, right, it's like 80 something % of B2B buying decisions are now accompanied by research via an LLM, right? So it still is that person has to know your brand exists and the LLM needs to know your brand exists. So those things have to come together. And I think, you just really have to balance that and the better you do at keeping that your content fresh and honest and stuff like that, the better it will do in the long term. I do think actually one of the most interesting things is, and I've talked to a lot of people, we have friends that, work in PR and comms and marketing agencies. And I actually keep telling them, like, stop being afraid of what's happening. This actually increases your value to most businesses. And I mean that because you said the best word, human, right? Like we've coined something internally called artificial influence. And we see a lot of these platforms that are popping up trying to write content, trying to write your website, trying to write your landing page, trying to write your email, trying to write everything. But truth is, the more it writes that kind of stuff, it's just repeating things it already knows. It's not moving your brand forward. It's not moving your story forward. So our whole sales pitch is that, to anyone in this space is keep doing from a PR perspective, from a marketing perspective, have the human touch, take all your content to the finish line. We're not naive to think people aren't going to use AI tools to help, create a structure for the blog they want to write or even a first draft. But make sure that you're putting that human element in. So everything you're producing is moving forward and out of that cyclical flywheel of, oh, I just told ChatGPT to write me a blog. I'm going to post it. Now ChatGPT is going to learn from the blog it just wrote for me, And so we've got to get out of that cycle. And I think from a go-to-market perspective, from a co-founder perspective, from a startup founder, make sure your voice is in the things you're writing. People know what you stand for and know how you differentiate. So it just doesn't become the same thing that another person is doing. I'm sure you've seen it. Like if you look at all these vibe coded apps, they all look the same. The messaging on the website's the same. Everything's the same. You've got to have a differentiator in market at some point, and you better start early because it's easier to then set your path on what your differentiator is.
Super, super interesting because I think obviously the barrier to create an app or barrier to create a company, I guess, has never been lower on one angle. That means we've got significant numbers of like very basic vibe coded apps which have no barrier at all and anyone could copy or improve tomorrow. I guess what it's harder to find now as a B2B. So if I'm a buyer, I've now got many, many more choices to cut through. And I suppose the bar is then higher for them to get there because using any of these tools sounds on LinkedIn sounds really interesting, really, really easy to use, right? But in enterprise, I talked to lots of people at enterprise today. The barrier to get them into the enterprise is higher now because they don't trust it. There's not they want all of the trust in the security side and the data side and the GDPR and all of these other areas, InfoSec. And then it's got to not only just kind of save some resource, whether it's person or tool or whatever, but also potentially get a revenue or a bigger ROI than it would have done before. And so it's quite easy to think that these tools are going to just fly in and easily get over the line. But I think the barrier is pretty high, right?
I think the barrier is crazy high. Like if I didn't have a good CTO and a great engineering resources, everything that I've wanted to do for years would be gone. And I think that still exists today. And I think you nailed it. I think there's this, it's kind of like the beginning of the iPhone when there were all those apps that did these little things, but most of them sucked. Right?
Yes.
And there's very few that have existed from early on to where we are today. And I think the same thing's happening now. Like you said, the barrier to entry is crazy low, but that also means the quality is crazy low. And also and it's at that point where as a B2B buyer who's looking at these startups and looking at all these things, the B2B buyer has to trust you as a startup founder, right? Has to trust you and your brand. And I think that is so important. And again, why I think putting your own voice and your own spin on things and not just letting these tools spit out what your landing page looks like. I think from a prototyping perspective, from all that stuff, it's amazing. But you have to, there's then a massive road to take it from, look what I did and it works, to now getting it out. And I think buyers on their side really need to ask a lot of great questions of these vendors that are knocking on these doors these days. Trying to get them as a logo so then they can go raise tens of millions of dollars to, you know, get this eventual promise across the door. I think it's so interesting space, but people have to be very careful, right? Their reputation in their own business that they're buying for is on the line. And you know, when we go to market and we're marketing our stuff, we have to make sure that people trust what we're saying and trust you as a person. I always say the best sales tool is the people selling it, obviously, because in this day and age where anyone could, quote unquote, do anything, people want to like the people they're doing business with, right? And that personal touch is super valuable moving forward. So that's why I think you got to kind of represent yourself and your brand. And
you do, yeah. And like in this sort of faceless AI world of automation and everything, that's no one's voice really there, is it? That's an LLM helping you out. And I think in your case, so in this new world where you've got to look at this real-time kind of data and perception analysis that you're doing, how does that sort of shift the GTM strategy now then? If you're having to monitor this in a lot more real time than sort of, I guess the cycles of GTM perhaps is shortened a little bit more now. Is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing that they need to be a lot more, these companies need to be a lot more aware of what that perception is in the LLMs, because that can change rapidly, as we know?
I think the answer is both. And I'll give you both sides. One is, and it just happened last week, right? For weeks, we had brands coming to us. We're working with a big hotel chain, and they'd come to us and they're like, everyone's saying Reddit's the number one source on ChatGPT for everything. Right. And so now we have to figure out how we, you know, quote unquote, see what's going on in Reddit and how we act against it. And then like last week, ChatGPT turned the faucet down on Reddit because they saw that Reddit, with being the number one authoritative resource where anyone could post anything, wasn't as valuable, right? So that can shift day to day. Then I'll also go and say, from a startup perspective, from a new product release perspective, it doesn't have to be a startup. You have to start thinking about this from day zero, right? Because how do I prime LLMs for the things that I'm working on? So when I do need someone to search for it X number of months down the road, a year down the road, the LLM knows the basic information it needs to know about it so it can do if it's not going out and doing real-time search, right? And then if it is going out and doing real-time search, there's my SEO strategy, right? I have to be involved in all that. Then I would say from a bigger brand perspective, it's a Titanic, right? It's a lot more difficult. It's a lot harder to steer it because it has so much information it's trained on you. And I think there's a great stat I read that it's like the top brands show up like 150 times more than smaller brands, right? So that means that the training data, obviously from years and years of the amazing work they've done in SEO and go to market, it knows so much about it. It's hard to shift that narrative. That's why we really focused on visibility. Is all synthetic today, right? None of these LLMs give you any data to show you what people are actually doing, how they're prompting, and it's probabilistic anyway. So wherever they're prompting from has a big effect on what the result's going to be, how they frame their question, all that kind of stuff. That's why we focused on the perception part of it, because perception can be monitored no matter what, right? I can ask an LLM, what do you think of my brand? And then the LLM can tell me, and I can determine, does that align with how I want my brand to be perceived? And then I can start to do the things we've already discussed. Write great content, do things to either maintain and or improve the perception over time. And I can start to see how the things I've done, the tests, the experiments I've done in my go-to-market strategy, from, you know, updating my website to have more question and answer type of stuff in it so it can train. I can then start to see how that stuff is working. But I think the longer term is, it all depends on how often LLMs are going out real world searching and how often are they relying on their training data, and then how long is the training cycle, right? Is it 6 months, a year that it's going out and scraping and retraining? It's gonna be interesting, right? You're gonna think at some point the LLMs may reach out and say, hey, we want direct input from brands you give us the information. We don't have to scrape. It's more real time when you publish. And then we can determine the value of that information the way we determine it off of a scrape today. And then it becomes a little more cyclical and a little faster. But I don't know if you're ever going to have a day where you're going to say, yes, this thing 100% influenced how this LLM thought about me. And then the other problem is, sorry, I know we have time, but the other problem is then it's not just Google and Bing anymore. You've got 10, 15, 20 LLMs that could be determining how the person researching your company or your brand or whatever, your product, is searching on. So you have to have this like wider view of everything you've done. And each one has its own biases and its own influences. And you've got to keep an eye on everything, because one of those could throw off a sale that could have make or break your business.
Yeah, which is wild. I think your comparison to Google Bing is a great one, because we were all been very used to kind of the rules that Google have been playing with and for so many years, and it got a pretty stable place where it was relatively predictive where you would end up in that search result, or obviously there's paid for and the like. But your example last week of changing the dial on Reddit, like, just shows you how emerging we still are with regards to your brand being completely changed in direction, both positively or negatively, in a matter of a day or two on one particular channel, right?
Yeah, 100%. And then the other thing that really I think is funny, jumping back a little earlier, talking about the threats of having AI write content and all that stuff. I think it was like a few weeks ago, ChatGPT and Perplexity were hiring content people, right? They know great content is what's going to make this stuff move forward. So, I just think it always goes back to, whether you're in media, whether you're in this space, content is king. And the better content you create, the more honest, the more authoritative, that will put you in a pole position, no matter which way this goes, no matter what visibility tools, no matter what anyone promises you. If you can stay focused and your brand and you can speak to it and you can get that message out there and your differentiators, I think, puts you in the prime.
Which for a startup founder now means making sure, if you haven't got it yourself, getting the right marketing resources that know how to write that stuff. Because like you say, this kind of ability to write all of your brand story through AI is not going to give you the cut through. And I saw those exact posts too, and I thought that they're paying well too, right? Like,
really,
I guess even 3 or 4 years ago, a sort of maybe content or social media writer would be kind of a reasonably mid to low tier role. These roles are serious, right? And that's a big sign. Yeah, big sign.
They're big. Yeah, they're big time, because not only do you have to cut through the social noise, you have to, again, write in a way that sets that brand tone and that message.
That's right.
The right way. Because, we used to always say, back in the day when you would send out a flyer at a trade show, it's like, right, you have to repeat the same thing 1,000 times for it to stick.
Yeah.
Now you gotta do that on all these different platforms and cut through all the noise. It's like so much harder, and you have to be really good at it. And it's really, really, really difficult.
And then I think when you were talking earlier about these sort of startups who have very, very little differentiation, or at least like it's like small feature ad, and then they're going after it hard to try and capture, like, you've got to have a much differentiated solution, a much bigger reason that will last longer than 1, 2, 3 months. It's got to last years, right? For an investor you would think, to even take a good look at you, because it takes time to build that authoritative LLM strategy. It takes time on the training data. It takes time, but also it's got to stand true, right? It's got to stand true against a lot of other competition. Do you think, like, where do you see that in 6-12 months? Like, because this space is moving fast. Like these GTM strategies that folks are putting together, a lot of them are, becoming autonomous. Where does that fit in with regards to brand perception and what you're doing?
Yeah, I think obviously there's anything that's repeatable should be autonomous, right? Anything that's repeatable, if you're sending out the same message to, lead generation and trying to pull in all that kind of stuff, go do that. But again, I would make sure that the core message within that email is got that human touch, right? And I think people can snip. Make sure it doesn't have M dashes in it, right? Like number one thing, right? That's the number one thing. Then I would say, I think from a startup founder, if you're building these vibe coded tools, you're doing these things, I think it's, again, really cool to show, like, look what I did, look what this thing does, and it adds value. I think your go-to-market story then needs to include your roadmap, right? I
Yeah.
want to know if I'm going to do business. Like even the companies we're talking to, from whether, on the fractional side that I'm working with to try to bring in and help the companies I'm working with, or even, at Sentiment, the ones that we're looking to partner with and do things. I want to make sure that you have a roadmap that's just beyond that singular feature, right? Like you can see the bigger picture. And I think I would be really skeptical unless it's just a SaaS tool you're paying $10 for and you download it once and it does these things.
Sure.
I would be really skeptical on these hundreds or thousands of dollars a month kind of quick, like we can promise you all this stuff without seeing where you're going with this thing. Like what value does it bring to me in a year? Once I
Yes.
figured this out, what value does it bring to me?
Yeah. And I think quite a few startup founders are relying on the speed of AI to help them pivot very quickly or add features very quickly based on the market response, which is, okay, you're listening to the market, you're listening to the customers, but really, you want a vision, and that vision, again, is human, right? Like, that needs to be your story, because that needs to come out in your GTM strategy, needs to come out in your roadmap, needs to come out to talk to the customer in a real way.
Yeah. I mean, I found, like, when demoing Sentiment or demoing anything else, a lot of people are very cool with, like, hey, they want to see it works in real time, right? Like, that's number one. And then number two, they're very cool with, what do you have coming next? And you talk to them, and then you actually have the ability. People are very understanding of, hey, this is next on my roadmap. I want to give you a sneak peek. Here's what it does. Here's, like, I can give you a report. I can give you back-end data. People are very comfortable with that to show you moving forward. So I would always say, have the next thing locked and loaded, and, like, be able to talk to it in the same way you're talking about what you're showing when you're bringing your startup to market. And that will help people show, like, this person really has a vision. This company kind of gets my needs, and talk to it from their perspective. I also see a lot of startups now that are founded by tech people that aren't from the space that they're in. And that's cool, like, because you bring a different perspective, but you have to show you understand the business that you're trying to sell to, right? Like, in the old days when we walked in from a media perspective, we couldn't go into some person who's been working in a broadcast operations room for 20 plus years and try to pitch them this new solution without being able to use the terms and things they know about. So I would say, also, as a founder, you might have this cool thing, you might think you solved this problem, but you have to also understand the larger business in general that you're trying to sell into. Your ICP is, like, very core.
Absolutely. Jason, this is great. I think a great place to end on. Some great advice there. I wish you all the best with Sentiment.
Thank you.
Looking out for that, and looking out for all of the work you're doing with those brands to help them with their brand perception. And we'll talk soon. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Ben.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.